The scream cut the apartment like a ripped wire, and John whispered that he did not make that sound. The mirror sweated with steam, and something moved where only he should be. John said, "Who is in there with me?" The shape did not blink, yet his breath hitched as if it knew lungs. Tiles clicked as pipes cooled, and the light hummed like an insect. The voice came thin as floss, and it tugged at his name. John said, "Say it again, and I will break you." The shape smiled a heartbeat too late, and the delay felt cruel. Water ticked from the tap, marking time he could not keep. The glass held a room that was not this room, and cold bled through warm air. John said, "You are not real, and I am awake." The whisper threaded shame through his ribs, and pulled tight. He reached for the light, but it flared and dimmed like a dying star. A dark hand lifted inside the mirror, and his stayed still. John said, "Leave me alone," and the other mouth moved first. The steam thinned, and the shadow leaned closer as if the glass could breathe. Dawn came gray, and John wiped the mirror with a towel that smelled of bleach and fear. He made coffee he would not drink and watched the street drag its wet tail along the curb. John said, "Work will keep my hands busy." The clock refused to rush, and every second wore his name like a tag. He stared at a locked wooden box on the bookcase, and the air around it felt stale. John said, "Not today," and the key stayed hidden where denial slept. The phone chimed with 3 messages he would not answer. A siren grazed the building, thin as a blade, and silence stitched the wound. He packed a bag and unpacked it twice, as if precision could soothe dread. John said, "It was a trick of light," and the lie landed with no weight. The mirror in the hall wore a drape, and he promised not to peek. The apartment muttered in pipes and ducts like a throat clearing to speak. Hell. He left the lights on, so the shadows had nowhere to gather. Emma met him in a cafe that worshipped sunlight and clean lines, and logic hung in the air like a creed. John said, "I need you to tell me I am fine." Emma Reed said, "Sleep, hydration, and less caffeine will help." He wanted a cure, and she offered a map that avoided the forest. Emma Reed said, "Stress makes patterns from noise." He watched the glass door as if it might breathe again. Emma Reed said, "You will do a simple test, and we will read results, not fears." The mugs clinked like small bells calling him back to earth. John said, "It had my smile, but it arrived late." Emma Reed said, "Mirrors distort under heat and low light." He nodded like a student, and dread took notes in his bones. A bus hissed outside, and the windows held steady. Emma Reed said, "Tonight you sleep, and tomorrow we measure." The city dragged dusk over its shoulders, and storefronts bloomed in neon. John paused at a glass window full of mannequins that pretended to be people. A reflection stood beside him before he stopped walking. John said, "Do not," but the air already knew his plea. The pain held a mouth that moved first, and the voice coiled in his ear. The whisper named a secret no one should own. John said, "How do you know that?" and his skin turned to paper. The mannequins stared with blind mercy, and the glass smiled late again. Traffic hissed like snakes across wet asphalt, and time narrowed to a point. John said, "I am not yours," and the reflection leaned closer, patient as a lender. He stepped back, and the copy did not. On the walk home, a man watched from the mouth of an alley, not hiding yet, not announcing. John felt eyes, and pretended he did not. Mr. Gabriel Graves stepped out with the calm of someone who studies storms. Mr. Gabriel Graves said, "Your shadow is chatty." John said, "You have the wrong person." Mr. Gabriel Graves said, "I have the right mirror." The words struck like chalk on slate, leaving a dry line in the dark. A bus roared past and gave them cover to breathe. Mr. Gabriel Graves said, "Do not feed it with denial." John said, "Then what should I feed it with?" Mr. Gabriel Graves said, "Truth, and that costs more." The streetlights hummed, and the city listened from a safe distance. John walked on, and the man did not follow, which felt worse. John boiled water for tea and stared at his phone screen, watching his reflection lag half a blink behind. He said, "Not again." The kettle's chrome belly caught his face stretched and thin. Every reflection seemed heavier, as if carrying an extra weight. His laptop camera opened by itself, flashing a brief glow. John whispered, "Stop watching me." He tapped the lid shut, but the black screen held a shadow that did not match his outline. The apartment felt tilted, edges bent where they should be straight. Pipes knocked in the walls like a slow heartbeat. John reached for the kettle and spilled scalding water, his reflection smiling even as he flinched. He pressed a towel against the burn and felt a cold draft slip under the window. John said, "I am losing time," but the voice in the glass replied before he finished the sentence. The voice had changed, crueler now, spitting phrases that pierced marrow. John said, "You do not know me," yet it spoke his secrets in rhythm with his pulse. It reminded him of nights locked in silence, of mistakes buried deep. The whisper coiled through glass surfaces, mocking his grief with borrowed tones. John pressed his palms against his ears, but the sound poured straight into his skull. He stumbled against the couch and the lamp flickered, shadows jerking across the room. John said, "Shut up," but laughter followed like glass shattering without falling. The air thickened, tasting of rust and wet stone. His reflection in the black TV screen leaned forward and mouthed, "Mine." He hurled the remote, cracking the screen, but the whisper bled through the fracture. Emma insisted on proof. She brought cameras, lined them against the walls, and set her phone to record. Emma Reed said, "We will see what is real." John said, "It is not real, and that is worse." The night pressed hard against the windows, and every reflection quivered faintly. John stood before the bathroom mirror, fists curled at his sides. Emma Reed said, "Breathe and look." His reflection grinned while his mouth stayed still. Emma's phone captured nothing but static bursts. John said, "Do you see it?" Emma Reed said the glass tricks under heat. But her face had paled, betraying the words. The mirror lingered on a smile, even after John turned away, and Emma lowered the phone slowly, lips trembling. Gabriel Graves appeared near the church steps, as if summoned by dread itself. Mr. Gabriel Graves said, "Things inside do not always begin there." John said, "You watched me." Mr. Gabriel Graves said, "I studied you." The night air buzzed with sodium lamps, haloed by mist. Graves leaned on his cane, though he did not look frail. He said, "Your mirror remembers more than you do." John's chest grew tight, the words cutting like brittle glass. Mr. Gabriel Graves said, "It will hollow you until only it speaks." John whispered, "What is it?" Graves answered, "Something fed by silence, bound to shame." The church bells rang midnight, iron echoes that made the shadows stir in John's periphery. At home, the box on the shelf seemed louder than the clock, daring him to open it. A whisper guided him closer, silk-wrapped and patient. John said, "Not tonight." The key glinted from where he had hidden it, and the reflection in the hall mirror tilted its head toward it. John pressed his palms against the box, feeling the pulse inside wood. The air thickened with mold and memory. He staggered back, heart thrumming in his throat. John said, "You cannot force me." But the reflection's mouth said, "I already have." He pulled a sheet over the mirror and dropped into the couch. Yet even with the cover, the shape pressed against fabric as if breathing. The night closed in, and John could not sleep. John went to the gym to outrun dread, but the mirrored wall waited like a lake. Treadmills hummed, and the air smelled of rubber and iron. He stepped closer to tie a lace and saw a breath ghost behind him that was not his. John said, "Stay gone." The reflection stood a fraction nearer than it should, shoulder almost touching. Music thumped, masking the small sounds his fear made. He lifted a dumbbell and counted slow to 10. The copy lifted nothing and still strained. John said, "You are only glass." The mirrored row collected his image into a crowd that moved wrong by half a beat. A trainer laughed with someone. and the sound felt borrowed. The lights pulsed, and his double smiled late again. He reached out, and the hand in the glass reached first. John said, "You do not belong here." The room kept moving, but he had stopped. At home the sink hissed, and the water ran clear until it did not. A black sheen crept from the drain like ink waking. John said, "No." The surface held a face that was his, pupil wide as a pit. The whisper called him by a name he had not used in years. He shut the tap, but the basin kept filling from nowhere. John said, "You are not real." The dark water showed a room that was not his, lit from below. He backed up and knocked a toothbrush to the tile. The bristles dragged through shadow like reeds in a swamp. The smell turned metallic, and cold walked his spine. John said, "Stop looking at me." The reflection's mouth moved first, and formed a word he hated. He pulled the plug, and the ink did not choose to leave. Emma came over with a notebook, and a steadier face than she felt. Emma Reed said, "We repeat the test with better light." John said, "It is never the light." She placed a level across the frame and set 2 phones to record. The mirror seemed bored until it did not. John said, "Watch closely." His head turned to the left and the image finished turning after him, slow as syrup. Emma Reed said, "Heat, shimmer." Yet, the word shook a little. She moved beside him and saw her own mouth lag. Her eyes widened, then narrowed behind reason. Emma Reed said, "We need baseline data." The mirror kept both of them a hair late, like puppets learning strings. John said, "Do you believe me now?" Emma Reed said, "I believe the instruments are missing something." The room felt misspelled. The voice stopped borrowing strangers and chose older echoes. It spoke like a doorway in winter, then like a child who knew too much. John said, "Do not." The sound braided into a chorus, tugging a memory that lived behind his ribs. The words named a night of rain and a road without lines. John shook his head until the room blurred. The mirror cleared and showed headlights that were not there. John said, "That is not what happened." The chorus laughed in his throat as if it owned the air. He pressed his palm to the glass and felt cold climb into his skin. The reflection mouthed a date he refused to keep. John said, "You are not my judge." The mirror smiled late and wore his guilt like a coat that fit. Sleep came like a trap. John woke without moving, shut inside his own body while the room held its breath. The ceiling fan clicked and refused to turn. The shadow stood on his chest without weight, close enough to fog the night air. John said, "Get off me," but only inside his skull. The figure leaned until the cold made tears. Its hand found his jaw and guided it open. The mirror on the dresser breathed once and grew deeper. John said, "I see you," and the words did not leave. The room narrowed to a mouth he could not shut. A hum started in the walls like farm machinery warming. The hand in the glass reached through nothing and touched the air above him. John felt the shape of a future he did not want. Gabriel Graves led John to the church crypt, his cane striking stone like a metronome of dread. Mr. Gabriel Graves said, "Your blood remembers what your mind denies." John said, "What do you mean?" The lantern light painted their faces in copper shadows. Graves placed an old book against the wall, pages filled with sketches of mirrors and names scratched over. Mr. Gabriel Graves said, "Your family line carried this curse, each generation bearing a reflection that does not belong." John said, "You are lying." Graves tapped the page that bore the name Lily Carter. The name clawed at John's throat, uninvited but familiar. He staggered back, pulse hard, breath shallow. Mr. Gabriel Graves said, "You cannot fight what you refuse to face." John said, "She was not supposed to be part of this." The crypt air grew colder, and the shadows leaned closer to listen. Back home, John opened the wooden box as if it begged for air. The lock clicked like a bone snapping. Inside lay brittle clippings, a cracked, compact mirror, and a ribbon stained brown with age. John whispered, "No, don't." His hands shook as he lifted a photo of Lily Carter smiling, the edges singed. The air pressed in as if remembering fire. The compact mirror caught his face, but it belonged to someone else. John said, "This is not mine." But the glass did not agree. The floor groaned and a chill rippled the curtains. The smell of damp earth pushed into the room. He slammed the box shut, but the echo felt endless. John said she was gone, and his reflection whispered, "She never left." The shadow's voice filled the glass, layered with Lily's laugh that had long been silent. It said, "I was born the night she died." John dropped to his knees, clutching his ears. He said, "You are not her." The reflection smiled with both their mouths. It pressed its hand against the inside of the mirror, and the surface rippled like breath on water. John said, "You are only guilt." But the glass whispered, "I am your inheritance." His stomach clenched as if swallowing knives. The cracked compact trembled on the table, rattling with a rhythm like a heart. He shouted, "Stop it," and the shadow leaned closer, eyes dark as closed doors. The room shuddered, and silence fell sharp as a blade. Emma stormed in, face pale with anger and fear. Emma Reed said, "You hid everything." John said, "I tried to bury it." She lifted the cracked compact and glared. Emma Reed said, "You knew about Lily." John whispered, "It was an accident." The reflection behind him smiled, savoring the confession. Emma Reed said, "How can I help when you lie?" He said, "Because the truth will kill me." The mirror's surface stretched like a mouth laughing. Emma backed away, heart pounding, hand trembling with the compact. The tension split the air sharp as lightning before thunder. The shadow leaned into view behind them both, waiting. In the hall mirror, Lily appeared, fragile eyes wide, lips trembling as though caught between plea and blame. John froze, heart breaking. He said, "I am sorry." Her reflection reached for him, but the shadow loomed over her, fingers curling like a cage. The air tightened until he could not breathe. Emma gasped and dropped the compact, glass cracking across the floor. The shadow grinned, voice threading into Lily's cry. John said, "Let her go," but the reflection only pressed closer. Tears burned his face, and the hallway groaned with unseen weight. Lily mouthed his name once, then faded behind the shadow's shape. The mirror pulsed like a wound, swallowing the light until only black remained. John woke on the floor with bruises spread like maps across his arms, though he had not moved in sleep. He said, "You are inside me." The mirror pulsed, faint handprints staining the glass. He staggered to the sink and saw a cut across his collarbone shaped like fingers. The whisper filled his skull, saying, "We are becoming." He dropped to his knees, gagging on air. The walls swelled as if closing in, shadows creeping like roots. John pressed his hands against his ears, but the sound tunneled through bone. He shouted, "I am not yours," but the reflection smirked, shoulders rising as if his own body answered. The bruise on his chest darkened, and the mirror fogged with breath that was not his. Emma returned with her recorder, determined to catch truth. She set the camera on a tripod and adjusted the lens. Emma Reed said, "We'll see what happens when no one blinks." John said, "It never shows itself the same way." He sat rigid, skin pale. The camera light blinked red, and his reflection moved before he did, whispering words out of sync. Emma gasped, clutching her chest. John said, "Do you see it?" Emma whispered, "Your lips did not match." She replayed the footage, and found only static bursts and silence. John said, "It knows you are watching." The reflection mouthed something she could not hear, and her face lost all color. Graves arrived with incense smoke, curling from a satchel. Mr. Gabriel Graves said, "There is one way to sever it, but the cost is steep." John said, "Tell me." Graves drew a circle of chalk across the floor, symbols carved in trembling lines. He said, "To starve the shadow, you must surrender the part of you it feeds on." John asked, "And if I cannot?" Mr. Gabriel Graves said, "Then it will finish the feast." The room felt thick, heavy, with unseen weight. John stepped into the circle, throat dry. He said, "What if I lose myself?" Graves replied, "Better to lose yourself than everything." John followed a call that was not Emma's. He heard her voice from a street he did not know, and the reflection in each shop window beckoned him deeper. He muttered, "This is a trick," but kept walking. The alley twisted into a hall of mirrors, each pane catching pieces of him, split apart. Emma's voice drifted again, soft and broken. John said, "Where are you?" The reflection tilted its head, lips curling into Emma's smile. He stepped closer, and the glass quivered. Shadows bled from one mirror to the next, weaving a cage of moving dark. His breath fogged and vanished too fast, as if stolen. Back in the apartment, John nearly struck Emma before he knew he moved. She caught his wrist, eyes wide. "Emma," Reed said, "it is inside you." John gasped, pulling back, hands trembling. He said, "I did not mean to." His reflection lingered with a grin long after he dropped his hands. Mr. Gabriel Graves said, "The bond is almost complete." John shouted, "Then break it now." Graves unfolded his satchel, laying out knives, chalk, and old parchment. He said, "Prepare yourself. The ritual spares no one." John's heart hammered as the mirror pulsed, shadow pressing to escape. He whispered, "Do it." The condemned bathhouse reeked of mildew and broken stone, its tiled walls a graveyard of mirrors. Graves lit candles in a circle, their flames trembling as if afraid. Mr. Gabriel Graves said, "Step inside and hold to memory." John clutched Lily's scorched ribbon, knuckles white. He whispered, "She never deserved this." Emma lingered at the edge, arms crossed, her eyes torn between fear and disbelief. The air felt dense, like breathing through water. The sigils Graves painted with chalk glowed faintly blue, crawling along the floor. John said, "What if this doesn't work?" Graves answered, "It must, or you will not walk out." The silence carried weight heavier than sound. The mirrors breathed, fogging and clearing as if alive. Shadows bulged from glass, forming limbs that pressed outward. John said, "It's here." Graves began to chant, voice low, the syllables scraping like stone on bone. Emma gasped as the shadow peeled itself from the wall, its face a warped echo of John's. John shouted, "Stay away from them!" The lights above stuttered, plunging the bathhouse into strobes of darkness. Each flicker showed the shadow closer, taller, bending the air around it. Graves said, "Do not break the circle." John's pulse pounded in his throat as the shadow leaned closer, smile lagging by heartbeats. The shadow's voices collided, a choir of past sins echoing from every mirror. John's knees buckled, and he clutched the ribbon tighter. He said, "I remember." Images of Lily's last night bled into his mind. A storm, headlights, and a scream lost in rain. John cried, "I left her." The shadow whispered, "And I was born." Emma shouted, "Fight it." Graves pressed his hand to the floor, sigils burning brighter. John forced himself to stand, shaking, his voice raw. "Wah," he said, "no more hiding." The mirrors rattled, hairline cracks spiderwebbing across their surfaces. The shadow lunged, its hand forcing itself into John's mouth, choking breath with cold. John gagged, his eyes bulging as veins pulsed in his temples. Graves shouted, "Name the truth." John gasped, "I killed her by leaving." The mirrors screamed, shattering but not falling, the sound like broken teeth grinding. Emma ran to the edge of the circle, tears streaming, shouting, "Don't let go." The shadow shrieked, its form unraveling like smoke whipped by wind. John's jaw trembled as he forced the words out again louder. "She died because of me." The bathhouse convulsed with the confession. The shadow fractured, splitting into shards of black glass that whirled around the room. Each shard screamed Lily's name before dissolving into dust. John stood in the circle, chest heaving, blood on his lips. He whispered, "I remember her now." Graves collapsed to one knee, drained, his cane clattering. Emma reached for John, pulling him upright. The mirrors lay dead, their surfaces dull, no longer alive. But the silence carried something unfinished, a weight not gone but shifted. John said, "It's over." Graves muttered, "Nothing is ever over." The last candle hissed out, drowning the bathhouse in cold dark. The bathhouse silence pressed into John's bones. Graves leaned heavy on his cane, his breath ragged. "Mr. Gabriel Graves said broken things still cut, even when they're gone." John whispered, "Then I will bleed forever." The chalk circle was ash, the candles drowned, and the mirrors hung dull and lifeless. Emma stood near the wall, her eyes following every shadow. John touched the scorched ribbon with trembling fingers, the only anchor left. The dust settled like gray snow across their shoulders, but the cold still lived in the room, waiting for a reason to wake. Morning stretched thin and colorless. Emma sat with John at a diner booth, coffee steam curling between them. She said, "I can't explain what I saw." He said, "Then don't." Her voice softened, "But I believe you now." He nodded, unable to hold her gaze. The diner hummed with ordinary life, yet every clink of silverware felt alien. John's hands shook as he stirred sugar he didn't need. Emma reached across, steadying his wrist. She said, "You don't have to fight alone." He forced a smile, but the weight in his chest stayed. The sun outside painted the glass in pale yellow, too warm for the chill inside him. That night, John returned to his apartment, a place that no longer felt like home. Most mirrors were draped, cloth sagging like tired skin. The mantel held one small frame uncovered, its glass cracked but intact. John whispered, "I'll leave you this one." He sat before it, shoulders heavy, breath uneven. The reflection showed Lily's face, calm at last, her eyes soft. He pressed a hand to his chest, tears catching in his throat. "You can rest now," he murmured. For the first time in years, his lungs filled without pain. Yet the silence behind the glass waited, patient. John leaned back, exhaling as though his ribs could finally unclench. The room seemed lighter, air soft against his skin. Emma's voice echoed in memory, reminding him that even broken people deserved rest. He whispered, "It's over." The small mirror shimmered faintly, Lily's smile fading like smoke caught in wind. John pressed his palms together, as if in prayer. The clock ticked steady, grounding him to the moment. He let his eyes close, whispering thanks into the silence. For a heartbeat, there was peace, fragile but real. The ribbon lay across his lap, a reminder and a promise. As John turned away from the mantel, the air cooled. He paused, his skin crawling. In the mirror, his reflection still stood facing forward, smiling a fraction too late. His blood froze. He whispered, "No." The silence thickened, pressing against his skull. The reflection tilted its head, eyes dark and patient. John stumbled back, heart hammering. The lamp flickered once, plunging the room into shadow. The mirror pulsed with faint light, like a heartbeat waiting for its next chance. In the last breath before blackness, the reflection mouthed his name with a grin that did not belong.